Welcome to Venoge Cottage and our series, Between the Lines. In each episode, we'll be exploring the letters of Jacob Weaver, the first owner of this building. Built in the year 1828, by 1995, the building was derelict. It was saved and restored. Today, it is known as the Musée de Venoge. The Weavers were typical of many 19th century Americans. Seeking better opportunities, they moved west. What makes their story remarkable are the detailed letters Jacob wrote back to his family. Certain incidents jump out at the reader. Could what is described in these letters be reality or merely embellishment? Join us as we read Between the Lines. The date, March 2nd, 1817. Spring, 3 weeks away. Jacob relates the following.
Now, I'll inform you about an accident, an awful accident, as it may be called. There was a quarrel between two brothers by the name of Caldwell that turned into a fight. The one draws a knife and swore he would kill the other. Well, the one threatened to be killed went to a justice of the peace and swore the peace against him which drawed the knife. So the justice issued a warrant against him, and the constable took him. And as the constable went to deliver him up, he knocked down the constable and ran away. 2 days after, he returned to town again, and then the constable ordered out some men with arms to help him take the prisoner he had taken before. So they went in pursuit of the prisoner, and he swore he would not be taken, and drawled his knife upon them. Well, there was a man by the name of Murphy among them. He presented his gun at him. Well, the other opened his breast and bid him shoot. No quicker said, Murphy shot him through the breast, and he fell dead. Then Murphy was taken and put in jail for his trial in our next court.
On face value, Jacob's account is pretty straightforward. There are holes in the narrative, but corroborating should be easy.
Jacob gives us so many glimpses into his life, but he always leaves us asking more questions. We just need more details. Switzerland County was founded by French-Swiss immigrants. One of those was John Francis Dufour. He was clerk of the circuit court, and his son Perry was only 10 when this incident happened. Perry would go on to write a history of Switzerland County. That book tells a different story.
The sheriff had a warrant for the arrest of a man named Caldwell, and Caldwell, resisting the sheriff, stood with his rifle in hand swearing he would shoot the first man who came onto the porch. There happened to pass about this time Jesse Murphy, who had a rifle with him loaded. When the sheriff summoned him and several others to assist, an advance was made. Caldwell leveled his gun to fire on the foremost. The sheriff ordered Murphy to fire on Caldwell, that he must be taken dead or alive. Upon which hearing, Caldwell opened the bosom of his shirt and dared Murphy to shoot. When Caldwell again leveled his rifle, the sheriff again directed Murphy to shoot Caldwell, which he did, placing the bullet in Caldwell's breast, killing him instantly.
Murphy was indicted for murder, and upon being arraigned before the court, he pled not guilty.
While Dufour's recollection certainly corroborates some of what Jacob wrote, it also leaves more questions.
Richard Moss is a friend of our museum, and he's done research for us in the past, and so we asked him to help us one more time. Richard was able to come up with the name of the dead brother. It was Smith Caldwell.
Using the name provided by Richard Moss, Donna began an archival newspaper search. The name of Smith Caldwell and an account of this incident appeared in several Boston-area publications. Initially, this led Donna to believe the Caldwells had come from this area. However, papers commonly reprinted stories found in other publications. The Vivi paper at this time, the Indiana Register, where one would expect to find a thorough accounting of the murder, was not to be found. A fascinating clue in this case is Jesse Murphy having recently arrived from the Allegheny headwaters. Researching Murphy, we found out his wife had died in Pennsylvania in January of 1817. By February, he had arrived in Vivi. There was only one way he could have done that.
I'm Martha Bladen, and I'm the Executive Director of the Switzerland County Historical Society. Vivi had been platted in 1813 prior to Indiana becoming a state in 1816. Vivi is a natural stopping place along the river because of the ferry house and the ferry that ran across to Ghent, Kentucky. And the ferry house was a great place of hospitality for people in the area. Jesse Murphy did what a lot of other laborers and immigrants did to this area. He traveled by flatboat down the river, and then Vivi was one of the main stops along the river. As they disembarked, they would go up Ferry Street, and Ferry Street became known as Whiskey Chute because of all of the taverns and places to stay along the way. Dufour's book tells about the murder taking place on property owned by Rodolphe Grisard. In this 1883 Atlas of Switzerland County, we have a plat of the town, and that lot is lot 141. That lot is directly across from this museum.
This is not the original 1817 structure, but it is the scene of the crime. We are on Main Street near the heart of Vivi. The major intersection of town, Main and Ferry, is a stone's throw away. If Jesse Murphy had disembarked from a flatboat, he would have walked straight up Ferry Street through Whiskey Chute. The commotion going on here would have certainly drawn his attention. Our next stop is the Switzerland County Courthouse and the Recorder's Office. The original books on civil cases are still stored there. Vicki James is the county recorder.
Some of the similarities and the differences between the county recorders today and what they were back in, say, 1814 would be everything was done by hand and in these large books that we're going to take a look at shortly. And today, almost everything is computerized. I have in front of me the actual book and the written document stating that Jesse Murphy was indicted, and this is a civil record book from 1817.
It is presented that Jesse Murphy, laborer, not having the fear of God before his eyes, but being moved and seduced by the instigation of the devil, on the 19th day of February, in the year of our Lord 1817, at the hour of 5 in the afternoon, with force of arms, did make an assault upon Smith Caldwell, and that Jesse Murphy did then and there shoot and discharge against Smith Caldwell a certain gun of the value of $4, which did strike, penetrate, and wound Smith Caldwell one mortal wound, of which said mortal wound Smith Caldwell then and there instantly died. Jesse Murphy, feloniously, willfully, and of his malice aforethought, did kill and murder Smith Caldwell, contrary to law and against the peace and dignity of the state of Indiana. This is the Switzerland County courtroom. The height of the ceiling, the large windows, all creates an imposing atmosphere. The light streaming in through these windows seems to be saying, "Here, the light of truth shines forth." Monica Hensley is prosecutor for Switzerland County.
When you can take away someone's life or their liberty, that is the essence of the law.
Serving as circuit court judge for Switzerland County is the Honorable W. Gregory Coy.
In 1817, our Constitution here in Indiana would have been less than 2 months old, and this notion that we have today that people have the right to a defense lawyer didn't necessarily exist in 1817. So when Murphy would have been brought to trial, he literally was probably walked in front of the jury, sat in a chair, and sat there and watched the trial without anyone examining any witnesses for him. The prosecution, this gentleman named Stephen Stevens, who, by the way, had a criminal history himself, he was a gentleman who was an Indiana representative back in, I can't remember the year, but he was in Brookville, Indiana, in the courthouse there. And he actually got in a fight with another guy who was an Indiana senator, and they both went to trial, and they were both fined $5 for getting in a fight in the courthouse.
When I reviewed the indictment, my initial thought was, no, this is not a case that I would prosecute or take to a grand jury, because it appears from the indictment that this was taken to a grand jury.
There's a couple of things to note there. One is the indictment says that the defendant acted against the peace and dignity of the state of Indiana. Our charging informations to this day say that. When you are charged with a crime, it will say you violated a certain law and acted against the peace and dignity of the state of Indiana. So that's a carryover. The malice aforethought is what we call today a mens rea element, M-E-N-S-R-E-A, which means you have to formulate in your mind that the intent that you are going to commit a crime. So they are saying with malice aforethought that when he picked up his rifle and whatever he did earlier that day, when he started to join that posse, his thought was, I'm going to kill somebody today. He formed the intent to do it, and that is how you would find him guilty. He did not do it, in other words, in self-defense or at the direction of somebody. By today's standards, we would be asking, is he immune from prosecution for acting as a member of law enforcement? It's a tough question to answer, because in 1817, who knows what the standard was for becoming a part of a posse when the sheriff was in need. He apparently didn't have a deputy available, and he asked for local assistance. I would say that from a layman's standpoint, looking at it, if the sheriff directs him to take action and he acts, he is acting in the spirit of agency. He believes he would have the right to act as the sheriff directs him without being fearful of prosecution. Obviously, that didn't happen. He was, in fact, prosecuted.
Blanket immunity is something that would be given by an individual who has authority to act and asks another person to act on their behalf or to help them in some manner. In this particular case, I do believe Jess Murphy would have been entitled to blanket immunity for the acts that were requested of him by the sheriff.
So if the sheriff is directing him to shoot, and if Caldwell is brandishing his weapon, does he have a self-defense argument? I think the answer is yes. If we could go back in the day and I were representing him, that would be my second argument. My first one would be he's acting under the direction of the sheriff. He's immune here. You should not be prosecuting him for murder. And the second would be, by the way, this man is known to be violent. He has attacked the sheriff not once but twice. And he comes on his porch with a firearm, and he at various points levels it at us. And so, yeah, I was fearful for my life, and I acted in self-defense. So, yeah, I think he does have a very good self-defense argument also.
On February 19th of 1817, here in Switzerland County, Indiana, Jess Murphy committed the crime of murder, and he did so with malice aforethought. He may not have intended to kill someone when he lit out that day to go bird hunting, but he was certainly called into service by the sheriff of Switzerland County, according to Jess Murphy. However, we have heard testimony from no one who has indicated that that was in fact the case. The sheriff was not a witness in this particular case. Mr. Murphy had the opportunity not to go forward with the crime, but chose to do so anyway. He committed the crime of murder.
What would my instructions to the jury be? In 1817, it would be along those lines. If you think that Murphy was acting as the sheriff directed him to, you would need to find him not guilty. If you think he was acting in self-defense, you would need to find him not guilty. If you think he was not doing either of those things, and he went there with the intention of killing somebody and killed Caldwell on purpose, then you're going to find him guilty of murder. Now, that is not what would happen today, but that's probably in the ballpark of how it went in 1817.
The jury found Jesse Murphy not guilty.
I do believe the jury got the verdict right in this particular case in acquitting Mr. Murphy. He was called into action by the sheriff, and I'm certain he felt pressure to do that, having been new in town. And in addition to that, Mr. Caldwell had pulled his weapon a second time and aimed it at Mr. Murphy, and he was defending himself as well as acting on the sheriff's behest.
Jesse Murphy, who was 47 at the time he shot Smith Caldwell, became an upstanding member of the community. He died in 1853. Samuel Caldwell, the brother who had sworn out the peace against Smith, was no choir boy. His name appears in several court cases, from simple trespass to assault and battery. That case involving swords, sticks, cudgels, feet, and fists. While the name of Samuel Caldwell appears in the 1820 census, 10 years later, at the next enumeration, all trace of him in Switzerland County vanishes. Most would end their search here. We, however, have one more stop to make. This is the Vivi Cemetery. Many of the early settlers rest here. This unmarked plot was the original section of the cemetery. The area before you is probably the final resting place of Smith Caldwell, but we don't know that for sure. In 1937, a massive flood destroyed this section of the cemetery, unearthing caskets and washing away many of the markers. If it were not for the restoration of Venoge Cottage and the discovery of Jacob's letters, none would here stop to ponder the lives of Smith Caldwell or Jesse Murphy. We hope you enjoyed our program. Until the next time when we read between the lines, thank you for watching.